guys, Mr. Delcourt coming at you here a little bit different today from the TA Forest. Gonna do a tree walk for class today like we normally would, except this time we'll do it virtually. So we're gonna try to check off all 6 of the conifers that we just introduced last class and see if we can find all 6 of these cone-bearing evergreen trees. Some will be wild, some will be found on campus as cultivars, but I think we should be able to get all 6 today. And it wouldn't be right to do this intro without pointing out this beautiful specimen behind me. We're looking at a shagbark hickory here, Caria ovata. This is a deciduous tree, remember, but still just an awesome tree. We have a few of them in the woods around here. This is a young one, but it's just starting to develop that characteristic, those shaggy looking bark, hence the name shagbark hickory. So stick with me. We'll take a walk through the woods today. Should be a good time. It's always fun to get out here in the TA Forest and take a look at our awesome trees. Look what we have here. Sunning himself in a nice warm spot on the forest floor. I'm on my way looking for my first conifer of the day. We've got ourselves a common garter snake. Not too shabby. Spring is officially here. The reptiles are out in the TA Forest. Good stuff. Alright, Mr. Delcourt coming at you here from our first conifer of the day. We're standing next to a beautiful specimen of an eastern hemlock. This is Thuja canadensis, and this is the first of our 6 conifers we're going to visit today. I'm standing in a grove of hemlocks right here that I'll show you here in just a few minutes. This is a great big nice specimen we have right here, pretty old tree. Then we'll walk around and we'll take a closer look at the needles on the hemlock and some other cool things ecologically that these hemlocks are doing out here for us. Alright, so here we have it, eastern hemlock. A nice close-up look at those needles. If I can put my hand in there for reference, we can see we're looking at, half-inch needles or so, and they have these kind of short little petioles that they're sitting on. If we flip them over, if you look closely there, they've kind of got 2 parallel white lines underneath, and if you look at the arrangement of that branch, it's really not opposite at all. It's kind of irregularly arranged, I would describe it, and we're going to see that as a major difference between Balsam Fir here in a little bit. I wanted to walk you around though and show you a little bit here where we're at out here. If we look around, first thing I want you to notice is just how dark it is out here. Get her into focus here. If we look just how dark it is in this grove, this is almost a pure stand of eastern hemlock. Real dark in here. There's almost no growth on the ground because it's so shady in here. And the other cool thing is if we look down, what we're finding on the ground all around in this grove is little clippings of eastern hemlock all over the ground in here. And these are left over. Let's see if we can get in here a little closer. These are left over from the past winter as porcupines fed in the canopy up here. Now, eastern hemlock is a really important food source for porcupines in the wintertime. They're going to feed up in that canopy by nipping the little tips of the branches off, and as they do that, they drop their clippings all over the ground, and it's a dead giveaway that porcupines have been in the area over the winter when you come in the spring and you find this kind of stuff all over the ground, all those little clippings there. And this has been a notorious spot over the years to take classes and show them a porcupine. I don't see any today. I'm sure they've moved along as spring has sprung here, but this is a classic wintering spot for porcupines, and it would be a perfect deer yard as well. It'd be great habitat for deer wintering because the snowfall underneath of these thick canopies of hemlocks would be much lower. Deer really rely on this, and when they get real hungry, they'll feed on those clippings from the porcupines as well. So kind of a little bit of a symbiotic relationship between the porcupines and the deer in the wintertime. But as I look around, I see eastern hemlock everywhere in here. Just a really cool spot. We have plenty of hemlock in the TA Forest and all over southern Maine. So keep your eyes out in your area for those short little half-inch green needles coming off the branch in a very flat pattern, and that kind of irregular arrangement of the twigs, and you've probably found yourself eastern hemlock. Alright, I know we're doing a conifer walk here, but it wouldn't be right to walk past this tree and not show it to you guys. Check out this American beech, Fagus grandifolia, and the coolest part about this beech is that it is perfectly smooth. That is what a beech tree is supposed to look like. We talked about this in class just before leaving there. We have a handful of these in the TA Forest that seem resistant to the beech bark disease, and this is one of them. I always
stop and admire this tree. That is what the entire Maine woods worth of beech trees would have looked like, you know, just 60 or 70 years ago. Not so much anymore. We have one right here that I can show you that is a little more traditional nowadays. This tree, tough to see here, it's kind of dark, but this tree has been infected with the blight. And you can see all those little cankers all over the tree. And this one really is doing better than a lot of trees around the state, but it definitely has a little bit of blight, where that other one over there is just super smooth. Remember, that bark is just one single cell thick and super vulnerable to damage from those scale insects that first suck the sap, and then that fungus that gets in there and infects the tree.
All right, guys, Mr. Delcourt back again. We got our second conifer here. We're standing in front of a balsam fir, Abies balsamia. Remember, Maine's most numerous tree. You wouldn't know it walking around southern Maine. It can be kind of a tricky one to find in a lot of woodlots, but you get up north and this stuff is everywhere. And remember, most people would look at that and say, hey, look, a Christmas tree. It is the species we use it for a Christmas tree, although most of the time we're using cultivars that are grown on farms in full sun. This tree looks a little different because it's grown in the shady understory and it's a wild type tree. But we'll take a closer look at some branches here in a minute, and we'll compare this to some similar species around us. We'll master our identification of balsam fir, Abies balsamia.
Alright, so let's take a look at some of the attributes of balsam fir here. If we look close, we see needles that are longer than eastern hemlock. They're about 1 inch long. They come off the twig in that kind of flat pattern. And the arrangement of this twig is very opposite. If you look, those side twigs come off in perfect pairs, and if you've ever decorated a Christmas tree, you know what I'm talking about. But if you look there, there's a good look at Abies balsamia. Those kind of softer, inch-long needles, pretty light underneath, but not as light as hemlock either. And if I come right next door here and do a quick comparison, here's another eastern hemlock right next to it, and if I put my hand out for comparison there, you can see how much shorter the needles are. And again, check the arrangement. Look at how kind of irregularly arranged that is. And if we come back to our balsam fir and we take a look here, we're seeing a twig that is much more consistently kind of oppositely arranged, much softer, a little bit longer needles on the balsam fir. So there you have it, species number 2. Alright, here we go with our third species of conifer on our walk today. We're looking at a red spruce, Picea rubens. Not a lot of spruce in the TA forest. There's a handful of them around, and here's one of them. Let's quickly kind of get up close to this young spruce and take a look at what tells me this is a spruce. Now, if you quickly look at it, you might think, oh, there's another balsam fir tree. There's a conifer with those kind of inch-long needles. But if I come up close and I look here, the dead giveaway, if we look at kind of the central trunk of that tree, you can really obviously see how those needles wrap all the way around the trunk of the tree and around the branches in kind of a 360-degree pattern. That is a red spruce. Also, as I grab a hold of this tree, this thing is prickly. Remember, the way you remember that is spiky spruce. So we're looking at a red spruce here right along the eastern trail, our third species of conifer of the day. Alright, we got another red spruce, Picea rubens, a little bit bigger specimen here, growing in a wet spot right behind the JV softball field. Again, giving you a nice look there at the needles. If I were to reach out and give a grab to this thing, it feels spiky. It is not inviting to grab a hold of by any means. And if we were to look at the stem up there at the very top of the tree, we would see needles that go all the way around the stem, and they do certainly do that on our twigs down here as well, way more so than balsam fir. Just another look at maybe a little bit bigger example of red spruce.
Hey guys, coming at you with our fourth conifer of the day. This is our state tree, the eastern white pine, one of our most common trees in the TA forest. This is probably our largest. It sits right along the eastern trail, and it is a real nice specimen of the eastern white pine. It's a tree that I admire every time I walk by. This is an awesome tree. In a few moments, we're going to take a look at the foliage of these eastern white pines, talk a little about their growth. But just consider that this is a really large tree by our standards. Historically, though, not that big. These things would have been absolutely huge. The old growth pine forests that you read about that were first cut by Europeans 200-300 years ago. So this is a big tree, but they can get a whole lot bigger.
Alright guys, well there you go. There's your up close look at the foliage from eastern white pine. We've got some down branches around here from some winter damage. But we're looking at needles that are, 3 to 5 inches long or so. They're real flexible. You can see them kind of blowing in the wind there. And they have kind of a nice feel to them when you rub your hand through. And remember, those needles are found in clusters of 5. I'll show you that here in just a second. But there's your eastern white pine, very distinct. Really nothing else super similar to it out here in the main woods, but pretty awesome up close look at eastern white pine. Now let's take a look right here. If we look at this cluster of needles that I pulled off, we can see if you count closely there are 5 needles there. WHITE is white, and there's 5 needles in the eastern white pines cluster. So there you have it, eastern white pine, Pinus strobus. Alright, let's take a look at this eastern white pine here, young one growing right along the eastern trail, and this is a really cool specimen because it showcases an interesting thing about pines that I think adds a little bit of intrigue to the woods as you walk around. This is a young white pine. It's about 9 years old, and I can tell that thing's 9 years old by the number of growth sections it has in it. If we think about the way white pine grows, we look at that terminal shoot, that very top one there, we call that the leader or terminal shoot. That's the growth this tree put on last year. We're talking about, oh geez, I don't know, maybe 18 inches or so. That tree grew last year. Here's its growth from 2018, this bare section here. Here's its growth from 2017 here, and so on and so forth. We go down, this tree's about 9 years old. You can tell it's putting on some decent height every year, and this tree's doing really, really well. Let's take a look over here. We've got the exact same species, eastern white pine, Pinus strobus. Totally different specimen though here. We talk about how the forest can be a slow motion death race, and this is a great example of that. Here's a tree that's about the exact same height as the one we just took a look at over there, except this one I counted sections on earlier. You can see how tiny and short those sections are, how kind of unhealthy this tree looks. Same height, this tree is approximately 35 years old. Been growing right here for 35 years and has just reached maybe 8 or 9 feet tall. We come over here and we look at this beautiful specimen. This thing's 9 years old. It's growing straight as an arrow, putting on, 1.5 feet or so of growth a year. Really interesting tale of 2 trees growing about 10 yards from each other, and that's all due to kind of site selection. This tree happened to land in probably a more nutrient-rich spot, getting a little better sunlight, just overall doing much better than that guy over there. The last thing I wanted to show you here was kind of the consequences of when an eastern white pine has its terminal shoot damaged. If we come in and look closely here at this young pine, we can see here's its leader, its terminal shoot. If this were to be damaged, pines just continue their growth, but one of these side branches here would start to angle up and become the new leader, and we'd end up with kind of a crook in the trunk over time. We can see that in, here's a classic example right here. Let me move over. We can see an eastern white pine who's had its terminal shoot broken off, and we can see all 3 of those branches are kind of beginning to angle their way upward and become the new main stem of the tree. What we'll end up with here, if we fast forward 20 or 30 years, we'll come back and probably have a bare trunk on an older pine tree that splits into 3 main trunks at about 7 or 8 feet up. And you look around your yard, you may see pine trees that have done the same thing, and it's almost like looking back in time and thinking about the journey of that pine tree. What caused it to have that crook in it? Was it a pine weevil that killed the leader, or maybe some wind damage? This here looks like the top of the tree was damaged by a falling branch maybe. But interesting stuff. These trees are at the mercy of their environment around them, and it really affects their shape over time.
Hey, Mr. Delcourt, coming at you with your 5th conifer species of the day here. We're looking at northern white cedar, Thuja occidentalis, and this is a cultivar, right? This is an arborvitae. We talked about that last week. It's a domestic version of the northern white cedar. We use it as hedgerows everywhere. I'm standing right behind the parking lot, right by the varsity baseball field on campus. Tough to find a wild specimen around here in southern Maine. They're around, but not super common. But this is a great way to take a close-up look at northern white cedar, Thuja occidentalis.
All right, giving you a close-up look here at northern white cedar. You can see those kind of leathery leaves there, evergreen leaves that they produce. Unlike any of the other needles from the conifers we learned, this guy's pretty distinct when it comes to identification. Northern white cedar. Alright guys, coming at you with our sixth and final conifer of the day. Right behind me here in front of the dorms, we've got red pine, Pinus resinosa. And I'll give you a closer look here in a second, but we're looking for clusters of 2 needles, much longer, more brittle needles. You can see cones that are persistent on the branches, shorter cones than we're used to seeing on our eastern white pine, and a really red looking bark as well. We'll take a look at all those things here in just a second. Alright guys, let's get a closer look at this red pine here. Again, this is a cultivar. It's not a wild type tree, but it displays all the things we're looking for in red pine. We can see those cones that are persisting on the branches for a couple years, and we can see those longer, really kind of brittle looking needles. I'll give you a closer look at those here in just a second. So there's your red pine, Pinus resinosa. If we come over here and we look closely at the bark, we can see kind of that reddish tint there between some of the fissures in the bark, which is very diagnostic of our red pine. And if I lay this cluster of needles down on the ground right here, you're going to see really brittle needles in clusters of 2, much longer, and as I said in the lecture, they work pretty good as a toothpick. So there you have it, our 6th and final conifer, the red pine, Pinus resinosa. It's been great taking a tree walk with you guys today. Looking forward to doing more of this in the future.